The pride of Umuru. Long ago, nestled between rolling hills and a great river, lay the village of Umuru. It was a place of rich harvest, laughter, and strong traditions that bound its people together. The villagers believed in honoring the spirits of their ancestors and the great river god, Amedioho, who blessed them with fertility, protection, and prosperity. Among their most sacred customs was the vow of purity taken by every young maiden. It was said that as long as the daughters of Umuru remained pure until marriage, the gods would continue to watch over them, shielding the village from droughts, famine, and misfortune. Chief Obidaik, a man of wisdom and power, ruled over Umuru with unwavering devotion to their customs. He was a towering figure, his skin weathered by the sun, his eyes as sharp as an eagle's. His authority was absolute, yet he was known for his kindness and fairness. More than anything, he took great pride in the virtue of the village's daughters, especially his own three, Ebo, Chinya, and the youngest, Nena. Ebo and Chinya were of marrying age, and their suitors, young warriors and merchants from neighboring villages, had come to seek their hands. Nena, however, was still young, barely 16, yet she was already renowned for her beauty, wisdom, and grace. She was the jewel of Umuru, the one whom elders predicted would bring honor to the village. The excitement in the village grew as preparations began for the annual festival of the River Bride, an ancient ceremony where the purest maiden would be chosen as the next bride of the river god. It was the highest honor, ensuring that the village remained in the god's favor for another year. A mysterious arrival. A week before the festival, a caravan of merchants arrived from the distant city of Nko. Among them was a woman who stood out from the rest. Her name was Adanma. She was unlike any woman the villagers had seen before, tall and striking, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that burned with an unusual fire. She wore fabrics of shimmering blue and gold, her wrist adorned with jingling bracelets. But it was not just her appearance that caught attention, it was the way she carried herself, with a confidence that bordered on defiance. Adanma was a storyteller, a trader, and, as some whispered, a woman of secrets. She brought with her fine jewelry, exotic perfumes, and tales of a world beyond Umuru's borders, a world where women were not bound by tradition, where they could dress freely, speak boldly, and choose their own destinies. The young girls of Umuru, including Nena and her friends, were drawn to her like moths to a flame. They listened eagerly as Adanma spoke of the great city of Nku, where women walked beside men as equals, where they could own businesses, make their own choices, and command power in ways the village elders could not imagine. But what of purity? One girl asked hesitantly. The gods demand it. Adanma laughed softly, shaking her head. The gods do not bind you, my dear. It is men who do. Tell me, do the gods come down to check your purity? Or is it the elders who hold the power? Her words lingered in their minds, planting seeds of doubt. A forbidden knowledge. Despite the warnings of the elders to avoid Adanma's influence, the young girls continued to seek her out. She taught them things they had never dared to think about, how to hold a man's gaze, how to walk in a way that drew attention, how to speak with confidence rather than meekness. At first, it was all harmless curiosity. But soon, Adanma introduced something new, an exchange of favors. She explained that in the city, women received gifts and wealth from men simply by charming them. There was power in beauty, she said, power that could be used to gain independence. You do not need to wait for marriage to be cherished, she told them. Men will give you everything you desire if you know how to ask. Some of the girls were skeptical, afraid of breaking tradition, but others found the idea intoxicating. They had grown up believing that their worth was tied to their purity, but now, Adanma showed them a different path, one paved with gold, silk, and admiration. Among them, Nena was the most conflicted. She had been raised to be an example of virtue, to follow the rules that had been passed down for generations. Yet Adanma's words stirred something within her, a longing for freedom, for the right to choose her own fate rather than have it dictated by customs she barely understood. A dangerous transformation. As the days passed, subtle changes began to appear in the young women of Umuru. They started wearing beads and perfumes purchased from Adanma, their once modest dresses now adorned with hints of color and ornamentation. Their laughter grew bolder, their gazes more direct. Some of the village elders noticed and grew uneasy. High Priest Onukochi, the spiritual guardian of Umuru, sensed a disturbance in the balance of the village's energy. There is a shadow creeping over Umuru, he warned the council of elders. A whisper that seeks to undo our sacred bond with the gods. Chief Obidike dismissed his concerns, believing that no true daughter of Umuru would ever break the sacred traditions. But Onukochi was not convinced. He watched as the festival approached, knowing that the test of purity would soon reveal the truth. The festival begins. Finally, the long-awaited day of the festival of the River Bride arrived. The village was alive with music, dance, and celebration. Drummers beat their rhythms as masked dancers moved like spirits, reenacting the ancient tale of the first river bride who had brought prosperity to Umuru. Nena stood among the gathered maidens, dressed in a flowing white garment, her head adorned with a wreath of fresh flowers. She was nervous but excited. This was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood. The ritual began. The maidens were led to the riverbank, where the sacred water test would be performed. One by one, they would step into the holy waters of Amediohos temple, where only the purest maiden would remain untouched by the spirits. The first girl entered. The water remained still. The second girl stepped forward. The water shimmered but remained calm. Then came the third, the fourth, one by one, they all stepped in. Suddenly, a terrible thing happened. As Nena entered the sacred waters, a dark ripple spread outward. A deep, unnatural wind howled through the village. The priest gasped in horror. The river rejected her. Gasps echoed among the crowd. Chief Obidike's face twisted in shock. The high priest turned to the people. The gods have spoken. She is impure. A heavy silence fell over the village. Murmurs spread like wildfire. If Nena, the chief's daughter, had been found unworthy, what did it mean for the rest? Panic set in. The elders ordered every maiden to take the test. One by one, the results were the same. Not a single girl in Umuru was pure. The festival turned into chaos. Parents wept, elders shouted in disbelief, and Chief Obidike, once the proud ruler of Umuru, stood paralyzed in shame. The sky darkened, and a chilling wind blew through the village. The gods had been betrayed, and their wrath was coming. The whispering wind. The festival of the River Bride had turned into a nightmare. The whispers of betrayal spread like wildfire, weaving through the crowd like an ominous wind. Women clutched their daughters, fathers looked upon their children with disbelief, and the elders exchanged grave glances. The gods had spoken. Not a single maiden in Umuru remained pure. The river, once a place of peace and blessing, now churned violently. It had rejected them all. The sacred test had revealed a shame no one had foreseen. The chief's wrath. Chief Obidike stood frozen in horror. His face, once full of pride, now darkened with disgrace. His youngest daughter, his jewel, his symbol of purity, had failed the test. "You have shamed me," he growled, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. His grip on Nena's arm was tight enough to bruise. "What have you done?" Tears welled in Nena's eyes, but she did not answer. What could she say? She had not thought herself unworthy, she had not felt different. And yet, the river had exposed her. The villagers' murmurs grew louder. "The gods are angry," one elder muttered. "They will curse us all," another warned. The high priest Onukochi raised his staff, demanding silence. his aged face bore deep lines of concern. "The river has spoken," he declared, his voice cutting through the panic. "Our village stands on the edge of ruin. We must uncover the truth before Amedioho turns his wrath upon us." His words sent a fresh wave of fear through the people. "The maidens must confess," an elder suggested. "Yes, let them speak," another cried. The girls stood frozen. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others looked at the ground, avoiding their parents' accusing stares. Then, one of them, a girl named Obianuju, broke the silence. It was Adanma," she whispered. The name sent a ripple of tension through the crowd. The villagers turned their gazes towards the traveling merchant, the woman who had arrived only weeks ago, weaving tales of a world beyond Umuru, whispering forbidden ideas into the ears of the village's daughters. Adanma, standing on the edge of the gathering, lifted her chin defiantly. "What nonsense is this?" she scoffed. "I have done nothing wrong." But the girls were no longer silent. "It was her," another girl confessed, stepping forward. "She taught us things we never knew. She told us that we had power over men. She told us that purity was just a lie. She showed us a different life." The gasps of the villagers rose like a wailing wind. Mothers clutched their chests, fathers gritted their teeth in rage, and the elders exchanged glances of fury and fear. Chief Obidike turned toward Adanma, his jaw clenched with barely contained fury. "You have poisoned our daughters," he spat. Adanma did not falter. "I gave them knowledge," she countered, her voice smooth as silk. "I did not force them to act." "They were innocent before you came," cried a mother, her voice thick with sorrow. "Were they?" Adanma raised an eyebrow. "Or were they merely ignorant?" Her words struck a nerve. Some villagers hesitated. Was it true? Had their daughters only remained pure because they knew no other way? The high priest, Onekochi, slammed his staff into the ground. "This is not a debate," he thundered. "The gods have been angered. The land is already turning against us. Look at the skies." The villagers looked up. The once bright heavens had darkened, clouds thickening like a shroud of doom. A sharp wind howled through the trees, rattling the bones of the earth. "This is a warning," Onekochi declared. "If we do not act, the gods will unleash their wrath upon Umuru. A great curse will befall us." Fear gripped every heart. They had seen the wrath of the gods before: plagues, famine, rivers drying overnight. They could not risk their future. A desperate search for redemption. "The only way to appease Amedioho," Onekochi continued, "is through a sacred offering." The villagers braced themselves. "We must find a pure maiden, one among you must be worthy to carry the sacrifice." A single girl. Just one. The villagers turned to the remaining young women, clinging to the desperate hope that at least one was untouched by Adanma's corruption. "You will all be tested again," the high priest commanded. The young maidens lined up once more, their faces pale with fear. One by one, they stepped forward. One by one, they were tested. One by one, they failed. Despair settled over the village like a dark cloud. "There is no one left," a man whispered. "Umuru has lost its honor," a woman wept. The villagers turned toward the elders, searching for a solution, a way to undo the damage. Chief Obidike's expression was one of devastation, his fist clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Then the gods demand a greater sacrifice." "What do you mean?" someone asked hesitantly. Onekochi, too, understood. His aged face turned grim. "If no pure maiden remains, then the one who has led them astray must pay the price." All eyes turned toward Adanma. She did not flinch, though the weight of their stares pressed upon her like a mountain. "You will carry the sacrifice," the priest decreed. "You will go to the river and beg Amedioho for forgiveness." For the first time, A flicker of fear crossed Adamma's face. The journey to the sacred altar is dangerous, one of the elders warned. Only those truly seeking redemption return. The villagers murmured in agreement. Yes, send her. Let the gods decide her fate. Adamma's gaze swept over them, taking in the hatred, the fear, and the desperation in their eyes. She had been powerful in the city, where men worshipped beauty and influence. But here, in Umuru, she was nothing more than a scapegoat for the sins of others. She wanted to argue, to tell them they were cowards for blaming her alone, that their daughters had made their own choices. But she knew it would be useless. They had already decided her fate. The priest handed her a sacred calabash filled with offerings, white feathers, palm oil, and kola nuts. You will walk alone to the sacred altar, he said. There, you will kneel before the gods and seek their mercy. If your heart is true, the gods may forgive you. And if they don't? Adamma asked, her voice quiet. The priest's eyes darkened. Then you will not return. Silence fell over the village. The judgment had been made. Adamma, once the mysterious and enchanting stranger, was now the outcast. The sacrifice. As the villagers turned away, leaving her to prepare for her journey, the wind howled once more through the trees, a whisper, a warning, a promise of what was to come. The chosen maiden's shame. Adamma stood at the edge of the village, the weight of the sacred calabash pressing upon her hands like an iron curse. The villagers had turned their backs on her, leaving her to walk the path of redemption or destruction alone. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the judgment of the gods, the murmurs of the betrayed, and the lingering shame of Umuru's daughters. The air smelled of damp earth and burning torches, and the village that had once bustled with music and laughter was now cloaked in tension. Parents whispered in hushed voices, mothers wept, and fathers stood in tight-lipped silence, their pride shattered. No one spoke to Nena. Not her sisters. Not her father. She had become a ghost among the living. Her feet were bare, coated in dust as she lingered near the entrance of her father's hut. She had been forbidden from entering. The daughters of Chief Obidike were supposed to be the pride of Umuru, the purest of maidens. But she had failed them all. She had failed herself. The last hope. In the center of the village, the elders sat in a solemn circle, their wrinkled faces drawn with worry. The failure of the maidens had thrown Umuru into disarray. The gods have cursed us, one elder murmured. We must do something before the land dries up, another agreed. Chief Obidike remained silent, his eyes burning with humiliation. His youngest daughter, the one destined to be the river god's bride, had failed the sacred test. Onekochi, he finally spoke, his voice heavy. Are we certain there is no other way? The high priest Onekochi's gaze was as deep as the river, filled with unspoken truths. There is one last hope, he said gravely. But it is a test even harsher than the river's judgment. The elders leaned in, listening intently. We shall seek the truth through the sacred fire ritual. A collective gasp rippled through the council. It was an ancient practice, a final test when all else had failed. The fire did not lie. If a single maiden remained pure, she would be revealed through the flames. But the fire spares only the worthy, an elder warned. And should all be found unworthy? The thought hung in the air like a curse. Then the gods shall take their price, Onekochi finished. The elders knew what that meant. If no maiden passed the fire's test, the gods would demand a sacrifice. And that sacrifice would not be voluntary. They had no choice. The sacred fire ritual would take place at dawn. The flames of judgment. At sunrise, the entire village gathered at the sacred grounds, where a great fire blazed at the heart of the shrine. Smoke curled toward the sky, black and ominous. The priest stood before the flames, his ceremonial robe billowing as he raised his staff. All unwed maidens of Umuru stepped forward. The girls, their faces pale and lips trembling, obeyed. Chief Obidike's daughters stood among them. The priest held up a small clay pot, its insides coated with sacred oil. Each of you will dip your hands into this oil, he commanded. Then you will place your hands into the fire. If you are pure, the flames will not burn you. The girls gasped in horror. One girl, barely 17, fell to her knees, weeping. Please, I cannot. Her mother yanked her up, eyes wild. You must. If you do not, the gods will punish us all. There was no escape. One by one, the maidens approached. One by one, they dipped their trembling hands into the oil and extended them toward the flames. One by one, they screamed. The fire rejected them all. Nena watched, her heart pounding in her chest. And then, it was her turn. The villagers held their breath. Surely, the daughter of Chief Obidike would be the one. She was the pride of Umuru. She had to be. Nena stepped forward. Her father's gaze bore into her, a silent command. She could almost hear his voice in her head. Do not fail me again. She dipped her hands into the sacred oil, her fingers trembling. She stepped toward the fire. The heat scorched her skin before she even made contact, but she pushed forward, her hands hovering over the flames. For a moment, the fire did nothing. And then, it turned black. A scream tore from Nena's throat as a searing pain ripped through her palms. The fire consumed her hands, the agony so great that she collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The villagers recoiled in horror. Even Chief Obidike stumbled back, his face ghostly pale. His daughter. The daughter of the great chief. The fire had rejected her. The truth was undeniable now. There were no pure maidens left in Umuru. The gods had been betrayed. The gods demand payment. Thunder rumbled in the sky. The wind howled like a grieving mother. High Priest Onukochi turned to the elders, his expression grim. The gods are angry. What must we do? One elder asked, his voice shaking. The priest's eyes were cold as stone. A greater sacrifice must be made. Chief Obidike's breath hitched. Who, he demanded. Who will take the punishment? The villagers turned, almost as one, toward Adanma. The woman who had brought temptation. The woman who had corrupted their daughters. The woman who had broken Umuru. Adanma's expression did not change, but something flickered in her dark eyes, a moment of realization, perhaps. She had played her game too well. The gods have decided, Onukochi declared. Adanma must carry the final offering to the sacred altar. A silence settled over the crowd. They all knew what that meant. No one who carried the final offering had ever returned. Adanma's lips curled slightly. Not in amusement. Not in defiance. In acceptance. She had known, deep down, that this would be her fate. The priest handed her the sacred calabash once more, heavier now with the weight of finality. You will walk alone into the sacred forest, he said. If the gods forgive you, you may return. If they do not, the river will take you. Adanma nodded once. Then I shall go. The villagers turned away, their judgment passed. And so, as the sun dipped toward the horizon, Adanma took her first step toward the unknown. Toward the gods. Toward her fate. The wrath of the gods. A hush fell over the village as Adanma stepped away from the sacred fire, the weight of the final offering in her hands. No one spoke. No one met her gaze. She was already dead to them. The sky had darkened unnaturally, and a sharp, bitter wind cut through the village, carrying the whispers of spirits unseen. The gods were angry. Their judgment had been passed. Adanma knew she had no choice. She must walk alone into the sacred forest, carrying the offering to the altar of the forgotten ones. If the gods accepted her plea, perhaps the village would be spared. If not, she did not let herself think about what awaited her if the gods refused. The journey into darkness. The villagers stood in silence as Adanma left the village gates, her bare feet pressing into the earth, each step heavier than the last. No one followed. No one bid her farewell. She was alone. As she crossed the threshold of the sacred forest, an eerie stillness settled around her. The trees, ancient and gnarled, loomed over her like silent watchers. The path twisted in unnatural ways, and shadows slithered between the trunks, whispering words she could not understand. She had heard the stories, no one who walked this path ever returned. She tightened her grip on the calabash. I will not die here. The spirits of the forgotten. As she moved deeper into the forest, the air grew colder. The wind carried voices, soft, sorrowful, and bitter. Adanma. She froze. The voices echoed through the trees, weaving through the branches like a ghostly song. Adanma, you walk the path of the doomed. A shiver ran down her spine. She turned, but there was no one there. Suddenly, a gust of wind surged through the forest, and the shadows shifted. The mist parted, revealing them, figures cloaked in darkness, their hollow eyes watching. The forgotten ones. The spirits of those who had failed the gods' trials. Their voices whispered around her, like leaves rustling in the wind. You are one of us now, they crooned. Adanma clenched her jaw, pushing forward. I will not listen. I will not fall. But with each step, the spirits closed in, their whispers growing louder, heavier. They spoke of her sins. Of the girls she had led astray. Of the traditions she had trampled underfoot. Of the village she had doomed. Guilt sank its claws into her chest. Had she truly been the cause of Umuru's downfall? Had she truly been the reason the gods turned away? Her steps faltered. A hand, cold as death, brushed against her arm. She gasped, stumbling backward. The shadows surged toward her, their arms reaching, their voices screaming. You are unworthy. Her vision blurred. The forest spun around her. No. A deep, primal instinct surged through her. No. I am not theirs. She gritted her teeth and forced herself forward, breaking through the grasp of the spirits. She would not belong to them. Not yet. The altar of the forgotten ones. After what felt like an eternity, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing bathed in eerie moonlight. At the center stood the altar of the forgotten ones, a great stone, blackened with age, covered in carvings older than the village itself. The air smelled of burning wood and rain, though the sky remained dry. Adanma knelt before the altar, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. She placed the calabash upon the stone. Her voice, once powerful, now barely rose above a whisper. Great Amedioha, hear me. The wind stopped. The forest fell silent. The weight of the gods pressed upon her, unseen but unbearable. I come to you in shame, she continued, her throat tight. I have strayed from the path. I have led others to do the same. And now I beg for mercy. Nothing. The air did not stir. The trees did not whisper. Adanma's heart pounded. Had she already been condemned? She closed her eyes. She would not beg for her life. But she would beg for Umuru. Spare them, she murmured. Let the curse be lifted. Take me if you must, but spare them. The silence stretched. And then, the ground trembled. A blinding light erupted from the altar, and Adanma screamed as she was lifted from the ground, an unseen force gripping her body. Pain shot through her, searing, unrelenting. Her mind splintered as a voice, deep as thunder, vast as the sky, filled her soul. You dare to ask for mercy. It was not one voice, but many. The voice of the gods. The voice of judgment. Adanma could not speak. You have defied us. You have defiled our traditions. You have led the daughters of Umuru into ruin. The pain intensified. Adanma gasped, her body arching. She was burning from the inside out. Was this how she would die? Would she be forgotten like the others? Tell us, mortal, why should we grant your plea? Adanma gritted her teeth, the fire consuming her. And then she spoke. Because I understand now. The light pulsed. Because I have seen the truth. I was blind before, but now I see. The gods did not respond, but the pain lessened. She took a shuddering breath. I do not ask for my own salvation, she whispered. But for theirs. A long silence. Then, the voice rumbled once more. You have been judged. A pause. And you have been found wanting. Terror seized Adanma's heart. But before she could scream, the light vanished. She collapsed to the ground. Her body ached, her mind reeled. She was alive. She had been spared. A village restored. At a cost. When Adanma stumbled out of the forest, the first rays of dawn were breaking over the horizon. The villagers gasped as they saw her. She was not the same. Her once beautiful face was streaked with dried blood, her once glowing skin was dull, her garments torn. She had survived. And behind her, the sky had cleared. The winds had calmed. The curse was lifted. The gods had accepted the sacrifice. The villagers fell to their knees, weeping in relief. But there was no celebration. No joyous cries. Because the woman who had once been Adanma was no longer the same. She did not meet their eyes. She did not hold her head high. She had been broken. And the gods were not done with her yet. The betrayer revealed. The sun rose over Umuru, its golden light stretching across the land like hesitant fingers, unsure whether to embrace the village once more. The air was different, lighter, almost cleansed, but beneath the surface, the weight of past sins lingered. Adanma stood at the edge of the village, her body weak, her spirit barely holding together. The gods had spared her life, but they had taken something far more precious. Her pride. Her power. Her place in the world. She was no longer the woman who had arrived weeks ago, dazzling the villagers with tales of the great city. She was something else now, something broken, something humbled. She had begged for mercy, and she had been found wanting. And yet, the gods had accepted her sacrifice. The curse had been lifted. The skies had cleared. The winds had softened. But no one rushed forward to embrace her. No one rejoiced. They feared her now. She had returned from the sacred forest, where no one should have survived. The gods had let her live, but at what cost? A village divided. The elders stood in a tight circle, whispering among themselves. Their eyes flickered toward Adanma, their faces unreadable. Chief Obidike stood with his arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. The shame of his daughter's failure still lingered in his heart. High Priest Onekochi raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. The gods have answered our plea, he declared, his voice steady. The curse has been lifted. The villagers released a collective breath. But Onekochi was not finished. His gaze swept over the crowd, resting finally on Adanma. And yet, the gods have spared her. The villagers tensed. They did not understand. Adanma should have died for what she had done. Why had the gods let her live? A woman, her voice trembling, stepped forward. What if she is cursed? Others murmured in agreement. The gods never spare the guilty. She must have made a deal with the spirits. She has brought dishonor to Umuru. How do we know the gods have truly forgiven her? The whispers grew, twisting through the crowd like a wildfire. Adanma clenched her fist, but she did not lift her head. She had expected this. She had known that even if she survived, she would never be welcomed back. The villagers needed someone to blame. And she had been chosen for that role. The chief's decision. Chief Obidike stepped forward, his towering presence silencing the crowd. His eyes locked onto Adanma, unreadable. She braced herself. I have spent many nights asking myself why this happened, he began. Why our daughters strayed? Why the gods turned their backs on us? His gaze swept across the villagers. The truth is bitter. But it is simple. His voice hardened. We allowed it to happen. A ripple of shock passed through the crowd. The purity of Umuru was once sacred, but we grew complacent. We assumed our traditions were strong enough to withstand temptation. We were wrong. The villagers listened in stunned silence. We cannot change the past, Obidike continued. But we can ensure this never happens again. He turned to Adanma, his expression unreadable. You will remain in Umuru, he said finally. But you will not walk among us as you once did. The villagers gasped. Adanma's breath hitched, but she did not protest. You will serve the shrine, the chief continued. For 12 years, you will live as the keeper of the altar, responsible for carrying all offerings to the gods. You will dedicate your life to restoring what was lost. Adanma lifted her gaze at last. 12 years. 12 years of isolation. 12 years of atonement. It was a life sentence. But it was better than death. She nodded once. I accept. The villagers murmured. Some were satisfied. Others still whispered of curses and betrayal. But the decision had been made. Adanma would live. But she would never truly belong again. Nena's fate. The people turned next to Nena, Chief Obidike's daughter. She stood among the other maidens, her once proud posture now hunched with shame. She had not spoken since the sacred fire ritual. Since the moment the flames had rejected her. She had once been the pride of Umuru. Now, she was nothing. Her father's voice was cold. You are no longer my daughter. Nena flinched as if struck. Obidike turned away. Leave this village. A cry broke from her throat. Father, please. Go, he commanded. Before I change my mind. Tears spilled down Nena's face, but she did not argue. She turned and walked away, her figure disappearing into the distance. She did not look back. She knew no one would stop her. The lesson of Umuru. The village slowly returned to life, but it was not the same. The festival of the River Bride was never held again. The elders reinforced the old traditions, this time with even stricter rules. Girls were forbidden from speaking to strangers. Merchants from the city were turned away at the gates. And no one spoke of what had happened. But deep in the shrine, where the torches burned low and the air was thick with incense, Adanma knelt before the altar. She had once mocked these traditions. Now, she was bound to them. For 12 years, she lived in solitude, offering prayers, carrying sacrifices, and asking for forgiveness. She became a myth among the people. A warning. A ghost of a past mistake. And when the 12 years ended, she disappeared. Some say she was finally claimed by the gods. Others say she wandered into the forest and never returned. But one thing remained true. The village of Umuru never forgot her name. They never forgot her sins. And they never forgot the lesson she had taught them. Some mistakes can never be undone. Some betrayals can never be forgiven. And some people are never meant to be saved.